Morning.
Good morning. Um, I would like to ask about the exam hours because I already saw that it's in November 30, right?
You mean yesterday? What are
No,
you
no,
asking?
no. Yes, in the homepage, it says that our exam is in November 30. Yes,
What work are you asking, baby?
I'm asking about at what hour is going to be the exam.
Oh, the final exam?
Yep.
Oh, okay. The final exam is going to be over the things that just from midterm to now we've discussed. I have a final exam review just like I did for the midterm. It has all of the topics on it. So it'll be about ethos, pathos, and logos. It'll be about comparison and contrast. It'll be about handling quotations, paraphrase, summary, and quotation, and
And,
logical
and
fallacies.
And our what hour is going to be because it says like 9:30, 10:30.
What does it say again?
At what time? The
The
hour.
time. What it'll be like the midterm. You guys will have all day to complete it.
Ah, okay, okay. It's just that there is like a PDF that says that it's going to be open from 9 to 10 and something like that.
Well, yeah, the final exam schedule has set times on it. Excuse me, but I open it up to all day.
Okay.
Now,
And
if the only time you have is during our final, because there are other final exams, right?
yeah.
So basically, you can take it at our usual time is 8 to 10 would be our final exam time if you need to take it at that time to avoid other finals. Otherwise, you can do it anytime during the day.
Okay, okay. And other question, that exam is going to be like the same for English 280, or we have another exam for that class?
You'll have another type of finishing activity for that class. It won't
Okay,
be the same exactly. Um, so I may have you guys do a presentation for 280.
okay, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Fabian was asking some good questions about the final exam. Just like for the midterm, I'll post a review so you know what topics it will cover, but it's basically covering the things we're talking about right now, everything that we've discussed from midterm until the end of the semester. You know, I'm assuming you guys know we don't have class after Thanksgiving. The 23rd is our last day of class, but then we have the online finals week the week after Thanksgiving. So I posted all of the dates on Brightspace in ENG111, but there'll be a review just like there was for the midterm, so you know what it'll cover. And again, you'll have all day to complete it, but please make sure that you know when your other final exams are so you have enough time. You may have to take it during our normal final exam period. If you have other finals that day, it's on a Monday. All right. Any other questions?
Are we going to be doing like a final paper, like another one, right?
Yes, we are. That will be the
When are we starting
final.
that?
We are starting that basically today.
Nice.
You're going to base it on the controversy that you looked at in your last paper, but this time you're going to take a position.
Right, we're just choosing a side now.
Yeah, and you're trying to persuade us. So that's why we're talking about the argument appeals, ethos, logos, and pathos. so that you can combine all of those in your paper to persuade us to agree with your side.
Okay.
Speaking of which, let's do this short little review video just to remind you about ethos, logos, and pathos.
Ethos, logos, pathos, a la Schmuck. Kind of like Larry, Curly, and Moe. We all hate losing arguments. It feels good to be right, but it feels even better to convince someone else that you're right, and then maybe rub their face in it a little bit. Woo! What if you had a bag of tricks that you could go to anytime you felt someone needed a little persuading? Thanks to Aristotle, the great thinker from ancient Greece, I'm smarter than you. We have 3 such tricks that will often get the job done. They're not foolproof. In other words, they won't usually get you out of mowing the lawn or doing the dishes. But if you're writing an argument essay and want a reader to see, understand, and agree with your point, these tricks are the bee's knees. Collectively, they are referred to as rhetorical devices. You want to know what they are? Sorry, that's a rhetorical question. The 3 devices are called ethos, pathos, and logos. Once you've mastered these tools, you'll be able to write a stellar essay, win political debates, and sell just about anything on late-night television. Let's start with ethos. Ethos means moral character. When the speaker uses ethos, he's trying to persuade his audience by convincing them that he's a good guy. So if you pin someone up against the wall and demand that they prefer Coke to Pepsi, it's probably not the most effective means of persuasion. But if that same person gets the sense that you're a decent human being who just wants to discuss the subject in a calm manner, he may be more willing to see another side of the issue. But moral character alone isn't going to get her done. Enter pathos. Pathos means emotion. As a rhetorical device, pathos gets us to stop thinking and start feeling. Something political pundits seem to have down to a science. Feelings. Does this mean we have to get all lovey-dovey and mushy-washy? Well, no, but sometimes appealing to someone's softer side can do the trick. If you're trying to convince a reader that crude oil is bad for the environment, don't just cite figures and fill up the pages with a bunch of charts and graphs. Talk about the animals that are connected. Bambi, and often killed when there's a spill. It will only help your case if you can get your reader to cry over spilled oil. And then there's the third and final rhetorical device, logos. Logos means reason, thinking, logic. Here is where all the charts, graphs, and figures come into play. But it's also about explaining to your reader in clear and concise terms why they should logically agree with your point of view. It's about providing concrete evidence to support your claims. If you can make them feel stupid for daring to think anything different, all the better. What's your name? So when writing an argument essay, don't set pen to paper without the big 3 in your corner. Ethos, meaning moral character, pathos, meaning emotion, and logos, meaning reason. You may also want to use Oreos, which won't add anything to your argument, but drug religion.
Big Fat Review. Ethos, moral character, used when trying to persuade audience that a character is a good person. Pathos, emotion, a rhetorical device used to get readers to stop thinking and start doing. Logos, reason, using clear and concise terms to help readers see logically why they should agree with your point.
Okay. So combining these appeals is the best way to persuade people. They're a little hyperbolic in terms of like saying, you know, you can get one over on them. That can hurt your ethos actually. So I will caution you about that, like, you know, making somebody feel stupid. Nah, you really aren't looking for that in an ethos argument. You're looking to come to an understanding and make progress, right? But these are the three combos, the sort of the knockout combination that you can use to really persuade people to agree with you. And this is valuable in anything that you want, right? Whether it's a work project, whether it's for school, whether you're just talking to a family member, knowing how to appeal to them can give you the upper hand, basically, in arguing, in persuading. Any questions about that so far? Good so far? The other thing I want to talk about is a different way of looking at arguments, okay? And after we watch this TED Talk, I'm going to put you in groups because I'd like you to discuss a couple questions about how our society views arguments. Okay. And what is the purpose of persuading people? Is it just to win? He has kind of a different perspective on it. So I'm interested to see what you guys think of it. So think about what he's saying and whether you agree or disagree with it, and be ready to discuss it with each other and then with the class. So this is a TED Talk. Share it with you here. Second.
Dropbox. For all things work.
Sorry for the commercial.
All in one place.
My name is Dan Cohen. I'm an academic, as you said. And what that means is that I argue. It's an important part of my life. And I like to argue. I'm not just an academic, I'm a philosopher. So I like to think that I'm actually pretty good at arguing. But I also like to think a lot about arguing. And think about arguing, I come across some puzzles. One of the puzzles is that as I've been thinking about arguing over the years, and it's been decades now, I've gotten better at arguing. But the more that I argue and the better I get at arguing, the more that I lose. And that's a puzzle. And the other puzzle is that I'm actually okay with that. Why is it that I'm okay with losing? Why is it that I think that good arguers are actually better at losing? Well, there's some other puzzles. One is, why do we argue? What are benefits from arguments? When I think about arguments now, I'm talking about, let's call them academic arguments, cognitive arguments, where something cognitive is at stake. Is this proposition true? Is this theory a good theory? Is this a viable interpretation of the data or the text? And so on. I'm not interested really in arguments about whose turn it is to do the dishes or who has to pick up the garbage. Yeah, I have those arguments too. I tend to win those arguments because I know the tricks. But those aren't the important arguments. I'm interested in academic arguments today. And here are the things that puzzle me. First, what do good arguers win when they win an argument? What do I win if I convince you that utilitarianism isn't really the right framework for thinking about ethical theories? So what do we win when we win an argument? Even before that, what does it matter to me whether you have this idea that Kant's theory works or knows the right emphasis to follow? It's no skin off my back whether you think functionalism is a viable theory of mind. So why do we even try to argue? Why do we try to convince other people to believe things that they don't want to believe? And is that even a nice thing to do? Is that a nice way to treat another human being, try and make them think something they don't want to think? Well, my answer is going to make reference to three models for arguments. The first model, it's called the dialectical model. We think of arguments as war, and you know what that's like. There's a lot of screaming and shouting and winning and losing, and that's not really a very helpful model for argument, but it's a pretty common and entrenched model for argument. But there's a second model for argument, arguments as proofs. Think of a mathematician's argument. Here's my argument. Does it work? Is it any good? Are the premises warranted? Are the inferences valid? Does the conclusion follow from the premises? No opposition, no adversariality, not necessarily any arguing in the adversarial sense. But there's a third model to keep in mind that has been very helpful, and that is arguments as performances, arguments in front of an audience. We can think of a politician trying to present a position, trying to convince the audience of something. But there's another twist on this model that I really think is important, namely that when we argue before an audience, sometimes the audience has a more participatory role in the argument. That is, arguments are also audiences in front of juries who make a judgment, decide the case. Let's call this the rhetorical model, where you have to tailor your argument to the audience at hand. Presenting a sound, well-argued, tight argument in English before a microphone audience just isn't going to work. So we have these models: argument as war, argument as proof, and argument as performance. Of those three, the argument as war is the dominant one. It dominates how we talk about arguments. It dominates how we think about arguments. And because of that, it shapes how we argue, actual conduct in arguments. Now, when we talk about arguments, yeah, we talk in a very militaristic language. We want strong arguments, arguments that have a lot of punch, arguments that are right on target. We want to have our defenses up and our strategies all in order. We want killer arguments. That's the kind of argument we want. It is the dominant way of thinking about arguments. When I said talking about arguments, that's probably what you thought of, the adversarial model. But the war metaphor, the war paradigm or model for thinking about arguments has, I think, deforming effects on how we argue. First, it elevates tactics over substance. Take class in logic argumentation, you learn all about the subterfuges that people use to try and argue, the false steps. It magnifies the us versus them aspect of it. It makes it adversarial. It's polarizing. And the only foreseeable outcomes is triumph, glorious triumph, or abject, ignominious defeat. I think those are the forming effects. And worst of all, it seems to prevent things like negotiation or deliberation or compromise or collaboration. Think about that. Have you ever entered an argument thinking, let's see if we can hash something out rather than fight it out? What can we work out together? And I think the argument as war metaphor inhibits those other kinds of resolutions to argumentation. And finally, this is really the worst thing. Arguments don't seem to get us anywhere. They're dead ends. They are what? Roundabouts or trap jams or gridlock in conversation. You don't get anywhere. Oh, and one more thing. And as an educator, this is the one that really bothers me. If argument is war, then there's an implicit equation of learning with losing. And let me explain what I mean. Suppose you and I have an argument. You believe a proposition, P, and I don't. I say, well, why do you believe P? And you give me the reasons. And I object to say, well, what about? And you answer my objection. And I have a question. Well, what do you mean? How does it apply over here? And you answer my question. Now, suppose at the end of the day, I've objected, I've questioned, there's also counter considerations. And in every case, you've responded to my satisfaction. And so at the end of the day, I say, you know what? I guess you're right, P. So I have a new belief. And it's not just any belief, but it's a well articulated, examined, it's a battle-tested belief. Great cognitive gain. Okay, who won that argument? Well, the war metaphor seems to force us into saying, you won, even though I'm the only one who made any cognitive gain. What did you gain cognitively from convincing me? Sure, you got some pleasure out of it, maybe an ego stroke, maybe you had some professional status in the field, this arguer, but cognitively who was the winner? The war metaphor forces us into thinking that you're the winner and I lost, even though I gained. And there's something wrong with that picture. And that's the picture I really want. I want to change it from 10. So how can we find ways to make arguments yield something positive? What we need is new exit strategies for arguments. But we're not going to have new exit strategies for arguments until we have new entry approaches to arguments. We need to think of new kinds of arguments. In order to do that, well, I don't know how to do that. That's the bad news. The argument is war metaphor is just, it's a monster. It's just taken up habitation in the mind, and there's no magic bullet that's going to kill it. There's no magic wand that's going to make it disappear. I don't have an answer. But I have some suggestions. Here's my suggestion. If we want to think of new kinds of arguments, what we need to do is think of new kinds of arguers. So try this. Think of all the roles that people play in arguments. There's the proponent and the opponent in an adversarial dialectical argument. There's the audience in rhetorical arguments. There's the reasoner in arguments as proofs. All these different roles. Now, can you imagine an argument in which you are the arguer, but you're also in the audience, watching yourself argue? Can you imagine yourself watching yourself argue, losing the argument, and yet still at the end of the argument say, wow, that was a good argument? Can you do that? I think you can. And I think if you can imagine that kind of argument where the loser says to the winner and the audience and the jury, yeah, that was a good argument, then you have imagined a good argument. And more than that, I think you've imagined a good arguer, an arguer that's worthy of the kind of arguer you should try to be. Now, there's a lot of arguments. It takes practice to become a good arguer in the sense of being able to benefit from losing. But fortunately, I've had many, many colleagues who've been willing to step up and provide that practice for me. Thank you.
We made USAA insurance for veterans like Martin. When his wife retired, they bought
Okay.
and switched to USAA insurance.
1 second.
For low rates and higher standards. USA.
All right. So what I'd like you to discuss is the idea that he has, basically, that we can transform the way people argue. Do you think it's possible to make, I mean, as he says, the argument as war is the dominant sort of thinking about argument, right, in our society. Can you think of some ways to persuade people to view argument in a different way? Okay. So I'd like you to think about those appeals that we talked about, ethos, logos, and pathos. Okay. Choose one of those with one strategy. And think of an argument that would help persuade people to think of argument, you know, as sort of useful for just the sake of adding knowledge. Okay. So you're gonna write down your argument with your group. You're gonna either use pathos, you're gonna use logos, you're gonna use ethos. Okay. And persuade us to view argument differently. Anybody have any questions about what I'm asking you to do? Essentially, you're going to pick one of the strategies and you're going to, as a group, come up and write down an argument that tries to persuade us to think of argument differently than argument as war. And there are no like right or wrong answers as long as you give it a legitimate shot. Why is it useful to think of argument as something besides a war? Okay. Any questions before I break you up? All right. So come up with the argument as your group that uses one of the argument appeals. When you come back, be ready to tell me which appeal you're using, and then present it to us to persuade us to think of argument as something besides war. Why should we? What good is it? Okay. So you should get an invitation to a group now.